The paper felt like fire between my fingers as I held grandmother's will above the kitchen table. My stepmother Sandra's face had gone white, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. Behind her, my half-sister Emma was already calculating her share of the inheritance in her head. I could see those greedy little wheels turning. My father stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Maya, what are you doing? Sandra's voice cracked, the false sweetness she'd worn for the lawyer completely gone. That's legally binding. You can't just. I smiled and let the will flutter into two pieces, then four, then eight. Actually, I can. This isn't the real will. The silence that followed was delicious. I'd waited 23 years, well, technically 46 if you counted my previous life, to see that exact expression of dawning horror on their faces. Emma lunged forward, trying to gather the pieces, but I swept them into the trash. You're insane, she hissed. Grandmother left everything to you and you just destroyed it. Did I? I tilted my head, savoring every second. Or did I just destroy a very convincing forgery? The color drained from my father's face. He knew. Of course he knew. After all, he was the one who'd hidden grandmother's real will in his safe, thinking I'd never find it. Thinking I was still the naive little girl who'd trusted them completely in my first life. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who'd died at 25, alone and penniless, after they'd systematically stolen everything that should have been mine. I was the woman who'd been given an impossible second chance, reborn into her 18-year-old body with every painful memory intact. And this time, I knew exactly what they were planning. The abuse had started the day my mother died when I was 8. My father remarried Sandra within 6 months, bringing her 15-year-old daughter Emma into our house like a parasite, wearing designer clothes. From that moment, I became invisible in my own home. It wasn't the dramatic kind of abuse you see in movies. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Emma getting my bedroom because she's older and needs more space. Sandra throwing away my mother's jewelry because it was too painful for your father to see. My college fund mysteriously emptying itself to pay for Emma's private school and writing lessons. Maya's so independent, Sandra would coo to visitors. She doesn't need as much help as Emma. She's practically raising herself. What she meant was, Maya can eat ramen for dinner while Emma gets takeout. Maya can work part-time jobs to afford her own clothes while Emma shops at Nordstrom. Maya can take out student loans while Emma's tuition gets paid in full. My grandmother was my only refuge. Elizabeth Chen had built a fortune in real estate, starting with nothing after immigrating from Taiwan. She saw right through Sandra's act, but she was getting older, more confused. Sandra played the devoted daughter-in-law so perfectly that even I sometimes doubted what I was seeing. Don't worry, sweetheart, Grandma would whisper during our visits. I've made sure you'll be taken care of. That woman won't get her claws into what's yours. I believed her. Even when the Alzheimer's started getting worse, even when Sandra began controlling who could visit and when, I believed her. Right up until the day I found out the truth. In my first life, Grandma died when I was 24. The will reading was a nightmare. Everything, the houses, the business, the investments worth $15 million went to my father, with the stipulation that I receive a modest monthly allowance of $3,000. Emma got a lump sum of $500,000 for her exceptional care of Elizabeth during her final years. I contested it, of course, fought for 3 years, spending everything I had on lawyers. But Sandra had been careful. She'd isolated Grandma from me in those final months, documented every sign of cognitive decline, and positioned herself as the perfect caregiver. The will was ironclad, legally. What I didn't know then was that it wasn't real. The stress killed me. Literally. I was 27, had just lost my final appeal, and my heart simply stopped during another sleepless night in my studio apartment. The last thing I remembered was the crushing weight of betrayal, the certainty that I'd failed the grandmother who'd loved me. Then I woke up in my 18-year-old body the morning after graduation. July 15th, 7 years before Grandma's death. My first instinct was panic. Was I dreaming? Having a breakdown? But when I looked in the mirror and saw my teenage face, when I picked up my phone and saw the date, I knew this was real. I had been given the ultimate unfair advantage. I remembered everything, every lie Sandra told, every manipulation, Every time, she'd convinced my father that I was difficult or ungrateful. I knew about the safe in his office and the combination he thought no one had seen him enter. I knew about Sandra's gambling addiction that she hid so well. I knew about Emma's eating disorder and the way she projected her self-hatred onto me. Most importantly, I knew about the real will, the one where Grandma left everything to me, written in her own hand and hidden in a safety deposit box. The one Sandra had found and destroyed, replacing it with the forgery that would make the family wealthy while keeping me dependent and controlled. But this time, I was going to be ready for them. The decision came to me like lightning on a summer night. Sudden, brilliant, and absolutely certain. I was not going to be their victim again. I'd spent 3 months carefully gathering information, playing the perfect obedient daughter while documenting everything. Sandra's gambling debts were even worse than I'd remembered. She owed nearly $200,000 to some very unpleasant people. Emma was already showing signs of the cocaine habit that would destroy her modeling aspirations. And my father was desperately trying to hold together a business that was hemorrhaging money due to Sandra's suggestions about investment opportunities. They were all counting on Grandma's inheritance to save them, just like last time. But this time, I knew exactly where the real will was hidden. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would let them think they were winning, right up until the moment I pulled the rug out from under them. I would expose the forgery, reveal the real will, and watch their house of cards collapse. But that wasn't enough. In my first life, I'd been reactive, always responding to their moves. This time, I was going to be proactive. I was going to make sure that when Grandma passed, they wouldn't just lose the inheritance, they'd be completely and utterly destroyed. I started with Sandra's gambling. I knew the illegal poker games she attended every Thursday night, the ones she thought she was hiding so well. I began following her, documenting everything with my phone. Photos of her entering underground casinos, videos of her placing bets with money stolen from the household accounts. For Emma, I hacked into her social media accounts. The passwords were pathetically easy to guess, and found the evidence of her drug use that she thought she'd hidden. Screenshots of dealer conversations, photos of her high at parties, records of the money she'd been stealing from my father's wallet. And for my father, well, I simply started paying attention to his business meetings, recording conversations where he discussed hiding assets from potential creditors, documenting the tax evasion Sandra had convinced him to engage in. I built my case carefully, methodically. But I didn't just collect evidence. I planted seeds. I called Sandra's bookie anonymously, tipping him off that she was planning to skip town. I sent the IRS an anonymous tip about my father's unreported income. I created fake social media accounts and began spreading rumors about Emma's drug use in her modeling circles. By the time Grandma's condition started deteriorating, I had enough ammunition to destroy them all. The only question was timing. Grandma died on a Tuesday morning in March, just like she had in my first life. But this time, I was ready. The funeral was a performance. Sandra played the grieving daughter-in-law, Emma the devoted granddaughter. My father gave a eulogy about family values and honor. I sat in the front row, dressed in black, and let them think they'd won. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. I watched Sandra prepare for it like she was going to battle, choosing her most conservative outfit, practicing her shocked and grateful expression in the mirror. Emma was already shopping online for a new car. They had no idea what was coming. "Thank you all for gathering," Mr. Patterson, the family lawyer, began. He was a kind man who'd known our family for decades. What he didn't know was that Sandra had been slowly poisoning his perception of me for years, painting me as unstable and ungrateful. He opened the manila envelope with ceremony, unfolding the document with reverent care. Sandra gripped my father's hand. Emma leaned forward eagerly. "The last will and testament of Elizabeth Chen," Patterson read. "To my beloved family, I leave my worldly possessions as follows." I let him get through the entire thing. Let Sandra's smile grow wider and wider as she heard about her husband inheriting the house, the business, the stocks. Let Emma squeal with joy when she heard about her $500,000 gift for exceptional care. Let my father nod gravely when he heard about my modest monthly allowance. When Patterson finished, there was a moment of satisfied silence. Then Sandra turned to me with false sympathy. I'm sure this is difficult, Maya, but you know Grandma wanted what was best for the family as a whole. Your allowance will be more than enough for. No, I said quietly. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Excuse me. Sandra's mask was slipping. I stood up slowly, pulling out my phone. I said no because that's not Grandma's real will. Patterson frowned. I'm sorry, Maya, but I witnessed this will myself. Your grandmother was of sound mind when my stepmother brought her a forged document to sign. I turned on the video recording I'd made 3 months ago. Grandma's voice filled the room, clear and strong. Maya, honey, I need you to know something important. If anything happens to me, if Sandra tries to claim I left everything to your father, she's lying. My real will is in safety deposit box 1247 at First National Bank. The key is taped under my jewelry box. Sandra doesn't know about this box. I opened it after she started trying to control my finances. The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra had gone paper white. Emma was staring at the phone like it might bite her. My father was making small, strangled sounds. That's impossible, Sandra whispered. She was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. Really? I smiled and pulled out a manila envelope of my own, then explained these. I spread the photographs across the conference table. Sandra entering the underground casino. Emma snorting cocaine in a nightclub bathroom. My father shaking hands with the accountant who'd been helping him hide assets offshore. Or these. Bank statements showing Sandra's gambling debts. Records of money stolen from household accounts. Evidence of tax evasion that went back 5 years. Patterson was staring at the documents with growing horror. Mr. Chen, what is the meaning of this? But I wasn't done. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been collecting for months. Sandra, did you know that your bookie, Tony Marchetti, has been looking for you? Apparently, you owe him $200,000 and he's getting impatient. I clicked to another tab. And Emma, your agent dropped you yesterday. Something about reputation concerns after those photos from the Avalon Hotel party went viral. Emma grabbed her phone, fingers flying over the screen. Her face crumpled as she found the social media posts, hundreds of them, showing her high and sloppy at a modeling industry event. The comments were brutal. And Dad! I turned to him with a smile that felt like a blade. The IRS called this morning. They want to discuss some irregularities in your tax filings. They mentioned something about a full audit. The room was spinning into chaos. Sandra was hyperventilating. Emma was crying. My father was frantically trying to call his accountant. But I had one more card to play. The real will is being read tomorrow at 10 a.m., I announced. I've already retrieved it from the safety deposit box. Grandma left me everything, every house, every business, every single asset. You're about to find out exactly how much nothing you're inheriting. Sandra finally snapped. You vindictive little bitch, how dare you? After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made. Sacrifices? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. You mean like forcing me to work 3 jobs to pay for my own clothes while Emma got designer everything? Like stealing my college fund to pay for her horse? Like convincing every therapist and teacher that I was the problem child while you systematically destroyed my self-esteem? I stood up, gathering my evidence. The only mistake you made was underestimating me. You thought you'd broken me completely. You thought I'd never fight back. But you did more than that. You made me stronger. Every lie you told taught me how to recognize deception. Every time you stole from me, you taught me the value of money. Every time you tried to make me small, you taught me exactly how big I needed to become to destroy you. Sandra was sobbing now, real tears of terror instead of her usual crocodile tears. Maya, please, we can work something out. We're family. No, I said, walking toward the door. We're not. Family doesn't steal from family. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and abuse each other for decades. You're just people who happen to live in my house and make my life hell. I paused at the door and looked back at them. Sandra collapsed in her chair, Emma hyperventilating into her hands, my father staring at his phone in shock. Oh, and Sandra? Tony Marchetti knows where you live now. I may have accidentally mentioned it when I called to confirm your debt. He seemed very interested in collecting what you owe him. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. The next morning, the real will reading was a much quieter affair, just me, Patterson, and a representative from the bank. The document was crystal clear. Elizabeth Chen left her entire estate to her beloved granddaughter, Maya Chen, who alone showed me genuine love and respect during my final years. $15 million, 3 houses, a thriving real estate business, and most importantly, the power to decide what happened to the people who'd made my life hell. I didn't have to wait long to use it. By noon, Sandra's gambling debts had been called in. Tony Marchetti was remarkably efficient when he wanted to be. She'd managed to hide from him for months, but debt collectors are persistent, and I'd made sure they had excellent information about her whereabouts and assets. Emma's modeling career was completely finished. The photos I'd strategically released had made her unhireable in an industry that depended on image. But more than that, her drug dealer had been arrested, and he was very interested in making deals with prosecutors. Emma's name was mentioned prominently in his confession. My father's business collapsed within a week. The IRS audit revealed years of fraud, and his corporate clients fled like rats from a sinking ship. The offshore accounts Sandra had convinced him to open were frozen, and criminal charges were being prepared. But the beautiful part, the absolutely perfect part, was that they all came crawling back to me. Sandra showed up first the 3 days after the debt collectors seized her car. She was a mess, no makeup, hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes she'd worn to Grandma's funeral. She rang the doorbell of my new penthouse apartment at midnight, sobbing and begging. "Maya, please, I know we haven't always gotten along, but you're the only family I have left. Tony's men. They're threatening me. They say if I don't pay by Friday, they'll—" She dissolved into tears. "Please, honey, I'll do anything. I'll apologize for everything. I'll make it right." I looked down at her from my doorway, this woman who'd spent 15 years telling me I was worthless and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Actually, Sandra, I think you're confused. We're not family. You made that very clear when you stole my inheritance and left me with nothing. When you convinced my father I was a burden and Emma was a blessing. When you threw away every single thing my mother left me because it hurt your feelings to see them." Her face crumpled. "But I thought—" "The will said—" "The will you forged? The one where you convinced a confused elderly woman to sign away everything she'd worked for to people who saw her as a walking ATM?" I shook my head. "No, Sandra. That will never existed. The real will left everything to me, just like Grandma always promised." "Then help me," she begged. "You have $15 million. $200,000 is nothing to you now, please." I considered this for a moment, letting hope flicker in her eyes. "You're right. $200,000 is nothing to me now, which is exactly why I'm not giving it to you. Because 15 years ago, when I was 8 years old and heartbroken over losing my mother, you could have chosen kindness. You could have been the stepmother who helped me heal. Instead, you chose to be a predator who saw a grieving child as competition." I started to close the door, then paused. "Oh, and Sandra, I bought your debt from Tony yesterday, so technically you owe me now. I'll be in touch about a payment plan." Emma came next, 2 weeks later. She'd lost 30 pounds and looked hollow-eyed from withdrawal. Her modeling agency had not only dropped her, but had sued her for breach of contract after the drug photos went public. She was facing criminal charges for possession with intent to distribute. Apparently, her dealer had named her as one of his suppliers to reduce his own sentence. "I need rehab," she said without preamble when I opened the door. "Real rehab, not the state program. Malibu Recovery Center costs $100,000 for 3 months, but they're the only ones who can help me." I studied my half-sister, this girl who'd tormented me for years while playing the perfect princess for everyone else. In my first life, I'd always wondered if we could have been real sisters if circumstances had been different. Now I knew the answer. "And you want me to pay for it?" "You're my sister," she said, and for once she wasn't lying or manipulating. She was just desperate. "I know I was awful to you. I know I took everything and never gave anything back. But I'm asking you to be the bigger person." "The bigger person," I repeated the phrase slowly. "Emma, do you remember my 16th birthday?" She flinched. Of course she remembered. "You threw a tantrum because Mom and Dad took me to dinner for my birthday instead of staying home with you. So you called all my friends and told them I'd said terrible things about them behind their backs. I spent my 16th birthday alone, crying, with no friends and no party. I was 15, she whispered. I was just a kid. So was I. But when I begged you to tell them the truth, to fix what you'd broken, you laughed at me. You said I needed to learn that actions have consequences. I leaned against the door frame. Well, Emma, actions have consequences. So that's it? You're just going to let me destroy myself? I'm not letting you do anything. You destroyed yourself. I'm just not cleaning up your mess this time. The last one to come was my father, 3 weeks after Sandra's arrest for failure to pay her debts. Tony Marchetti hadn't been kind to her when she couldn't come up with the money. She was in the hospital with 2 broken ribs and a shattered wrist, facing assault charges that would likely put her away for years. Dad looked like he'd aged a decade in a month. His business was gone, his assets frozen, his wife in jail, and his golden child in rehab after stealing prescription medications from elderly patients during her community service. I lost everything, he said simply when I opened the door. The house, the car, the business, everything's gone. I know. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. Your grandmother's will was real then. The one we showed the lawyer was a forgery, yes. Another nod. Sandra's idea? Does it matter? He was quiet for a long moment. I suppose not. The damage is done either way. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the father I remembered from before Mom died. Tired, broken, but honest. I failed you, I know that. I failed as a father, as a protector, as a decent human being. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The acknowledgement, the apology, the recognition of what they'd done to me. But as I looked at this broken man who'd once been my hero, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness. Yes, I said simply, you did. He flinched like I'd hit him. Is there any way to make this right? Any way to earn your forgiveness? I considered the question seriously. In my fantasies, he would grovel and beg, and I would have the power to grant or deny his redemption. But the reality was simpler and somehow more final. No, I said. There isn't. Because you didn't just fail me, Dad. You actively chose them over me, again and again, for 15 years. Every time Sandra lied about me, you believed her. Every time Emma hurt me, you told me to be the bigger person. Every time I needed you to be my father, you chose to be their enabler instead. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sure you are, but sorry doesn't give me back my childhood. Sorry doesn't undo the therapy I needed because you convinced me I was inherently unlovable. Sorry doesn't bring back the mother whose memory you let Sandra destroy. I stepped back into my apartment. Goodbye, Dad. Don't contact me again. The next few months passed in a blur of legal proceedings and personal victories. Sandra's trial made local news. The prosecution painted a picture of a manipulative gambling addict who'd systematically defrauded an elderly woman with dementia. She got 8 years. Emma's drug case was less dramatic but more personally satisfying. Community service turned into jail time when she was caught stealing again. The judge was not impressed with her entitled attitude or her lawyer's attempts to blame her addiction on family trauma. My father's business fraud case was still winding through the courts, but his assets remained frozen. He was living in a studio apartment and working at a call center. A 60-year-old man starting over with nothing. And me? I was thriving. I used Grandma's real estate business as a foundation and expanded into tech startups and renewable energy. The $15 million became 20, then 30, then 50. I hired the best therapists money could buy and worked through the trauma of 2 lifetimes. I traveled the world, earned a master's degree in business, and built a life that was entirely my own. I also established the Elizabeth Chen Foundation for Family Violence Prevention, offering scholarships and support to young people escaping abusive households. Every year, on the anniversary of Grandma's death, I hosted a gala that raised millions for the cause. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the money Sandra had tried to steal to help people she'd never cared about. But the real victory wasn't the money or the success or even the revenge. The real victory was the morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about them in weeks. That their power over me was completely gone, that I was free. 5 years after the will reading, I was giving a speech at a conference for entrepreneurs when I saw him. A young man in the audience, maybe 21, with hollow eyes and the particular kind of tension that comes from living with abusers. He reminded me of myself at that age. Broken, but trying to hide it. Strong, but convinced he was weak. After my speech, he approached me nervously. "Miss Chen, I just wanted to say, your story inspired me. I'm dealing with some family stuff, and I've been thinking about giving up. But hearing how you fought back." He paused. "It gives me hope." I looked at this young man, this stranger who carried the same wounds I'd carried, and felt something shift in my chest. Not the cold satisfaction of revenge, but something warmer. Something that felt like purpose. "What's your name?" I asked. David Kim." "David, would you like to have coffee sometime? I think I might be able to help." That coffee turned into a mentorship, which turned into David joining my foundation as a program coordinator. He wasn't the only one. Over the years, I found dozens of young people carrying the same scars, fighting the same battles I'd fought. I helped them in ways I'd never been helped. I gave them resources, connections, and most importantly, the knowledge that they deserved better, that they were worth fighting for. It was during one of our foundation meetings, 7 years after Grandma's death, that my assistant knocked on my office door. "Miss Chen, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your half-sister." I looked up from the grant applications I was reviewing, surprised. Emma had been out of jail for 6 months, but I hadn't heard from her since her release. "Send her in." Emma walked into my office like she was approaching a judge. She was thin but healthy, her hair natural brown instead of the platinum blonde she'd preferred. She wore simple clothes and no makeup, and for the first time in my memory, she looked genuinely humble. "Hi, Maya." "Emma." She took a breath. "I'm in recovery, 97 days clean. I'm working at a coffee shop and living in a sober house, and I'm trying to make amends to the people I hurt." I gestured to a chair, curious despite myself. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, sitting down carefully. "I don't even think I deserve it. But I needed to tell you that I understand now. What we did to you, what I did to you, it was monstrous. You were just a little girl who'd lost her mother, and instead of protecting you, I competed with you. I made your life hell because I was jealous and scared and too young to understand that there was enough love for both of us." She was crying now, but quietly, without drama. "I can't undo any of it. I can't give you back your childhood, or your trust, or the family you should have had. But I can tell you that you were right to destroy us. We deserved everything that happened." I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle, the way she planned to use this conversation against me. But I saw only exhaustion and genuine regret. "What do you want from me, Emma?" "Nothing," she said, and I believed her. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm proud of you. What you've built, what you've become, Grandma would be so proud." She stood up to leave, then paused. "I read about your foundation, the work you're doing for kids in abusive families. It's incredible. You took everything terrible that happened to you and turned it into something that helps people." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking. The revenge had been perfect, complete, devastating, exactly what they'd deserved. But this moment felt different. Not like an ending, but like a beginning. That night, I called my assistant and had her set up a meeting with David and the rest of my program coordinators. It was time to expand the foundation. Time to help more people who'd been where I'd been. Time to turn my second chance into second chances for others. The real victory wasn't destroying the people who'd hurt me. The real victory was becoming someone strong enough to lift up the people who needed it most. I'd been reborn for a reason, and it wasn't just to tear up a will. It was to rewrite the story entirely. Years later, I would look back on that moment in Patterson's office. Sandra's face when she realized she'd lost everything. Emma's breakdown when her lies caught up with her. My father's quiet acceptance of his failure, and feel something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for what they'd done to me, but for what surviving them had made me capable of becoming. Every child I helped escape an abusive home, every scholarship I funded, every life I touched through the foundation, it all traced back to that moment when they thought they'd broken me completely. They'd created their own destruction the day they chose cruelty over kindness. I'd just been the instrument of inevitability. Sandra served 6 years of her 8 year sentence before being stabbed by another inmate who didn't appreciate her attempts to run gambling rings in prison. Emma overdosed 2 years after our conversation, despite the rehab and the recovery program and all her promises to stay clean. My father died of a heart attack while working his third job alone in a studio apartment at 67. I felt nothing when I heard these news, not satisfaction, not grief, just closure. They were gone, and I was free to live the life Grandma had always wanted for me. The life I'd been denied in my first chance but had seized completely in my second. I never remarried my father or stepmother. I never tried to rebuild those relationships or find a way back to the family that had rejected me. Some bridges are meant to burn, and some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Instead, I built my own family. The foundation staff who'd become my chosen siblings. The kids we helped who'd become my legacy. The community of survivors who'd become my strength. At 35 or 52, depending on how you counted, I stood at the podium of my foundation's 10th anniversary gala and looked out at a room full of people whose lives had been transformed. Former scholarship recipients who'd become doctors and teachers and advocates. Survivors who'd escaped their abusers and built new lives. Families that had been saved from destruction. 10 years ago, I said into the microphone, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift life can give you isn't a second chance to avoid your mistakes. It's a second chance to choose who you become because of them. I thought about 18-year-old Maya sitting in that lawyer's office with a fake will and no idea she had the power to fight back. I thought about 27-year-old Maya dying alone and convinced she'd failed. And I thought about the Maya I'd become. Wealthy beyond measure, respected, loved, free. The real will had been torn up that day, in a sense. Not the legal document, but the story that had been written for me by people who'd never seen my worth. I'd destroyed their version of my life and written my own, and this version was beautiful. The applause washed over me as I finished my speech, but I was already thinking ahead. Tomorrow, there would be more kids to help, more stories to rewrite, more second chances to create. I'd been reborn to tear up one will and write 1,000 others, and I was just getting started.